Model 6.1 is on sustainable transport and infrastructure resilient to weather. We also have introduction, definitions, findings, consequences of climate change taken into account at the world level, consideration at continental level, sustainable transport concept, goals, actions, conclusions. The latest IPCC report from 2018 is based on the extensive scientific analysis, the exponential growth of the population and the economy, as well as the modern way of life of our globalized consumer society in recent decades. It has continued to increase emission of carbon dioxide, CO2, and other greenhouse gases. The concentration of these greenhouse gases resulting in more than 95% of human activity during the last 50 years in Earth's atmosphere is currently at its highest level since 800,000 years and continues to grow. The global warming of the past 50 years is probably due to more than 95% of human activity. Definitions. Here, climate change is defined as the variations in climatic characteristics at a given location during the time. Some forms of air pollution resulting from human activities threatens to significantly alter the climate in the direction of global warming. This phenomena can cause damage important among other things and emphasize extreme climatic events such as droughts, floods, cyclones, etc. Global warming is due to the effect of greenhouse, who is a natural phenomenon essential to human life and that of species. However, over a century and a half of industrialization, including deforestation and large-scale agriculture, the quantities of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have reached levels not reached in 3 million years. As population, economies, and living standard advances, the cumulative level of greenhouse gases emission has also increased. A few scientific facts which explains our findings here is that the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is directly related to the average global temperature on Earth. Since the days of the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of greenhouse gases has increased steadily, as have global temperatures average. The most abundant greenhouse gas, 2/3, is carbon dioxide, CO2, largely produced by the combustion of fossil fuels. The main greenhouse gases and their contribution to climate change are carbon dioxide, CO2 represented as 64%, methane gas, CH4 for 13%, nitrous oxide, NO2 for 4%, hydrocarbons including CFC for 9%, and tropospheric ozone, O3 for 10%. Global warming share of various greenhouse gases can be seen in this presentation. It's a pie chart where the different gases are presented. The ozone, tropospheric, 10%, protozydiodes, N2O, 4%, hydrocarbons, CFC, 9%, methane gas, CH4, 13%, and carbon dioxide, 64%. In the presentation here, you find out that carbon dioxide is taking the larger part of this presentation. So it's another major source of global warming, because these are released from our automobiles, our generating sets, and other combustible materials. Distribution of the 64% among the main issue modes of transportation is also here, is represented in this chart. What are the consequences of climate change? The consequences of climate change can be seen in this presentation, as it is scientifically impossible to attribute every weather event to current climate change. However, it is possible to prove that global warming increases the probability of extreme weather phenomena to cause significant damage to infrastructure, that is road structure, dikes, hydroelectric dams, etc. Among these phenomena, extreme, we can cite the intensification of precipitation, which leads to heavy rains causing catastrophic flooding, as was the case in Nigeria, the Gusau Dam in 2006, or Zimbabwe, Tokwe Mukursi in 2014. This pictorial view that explain these consequences of climate change. You can see the bridge embankment has been washed away, and then part of the bridge has fallen and submerged. The surface runoff, the volume of water has taken part of the soil, exposing it to great danger, making the road inaccessible for people and goods and motor or trucks. You can also see people trying to find their way out. It's a submerged vehicle taken by the flood. They are hanging on it. Another bridge has been collapsed. You can also see the vegetation being exposed as the soils are washed from this flood. In continuation of the consequences, the active roads are particularly vulnerable to climatic stressors, such as rising temperature, increased precipitation and flooding, damage and premature aging of roads caused by climatic change, require significantly increase the frequency and scope of road maintenance and rehabilitation works. In addition to higher maintenance and rehabilitation costs, damaged road infrastructure due to climate change train more frequent disruption of the movement of people and goods with a direct impact on economic productivity. Taking into account at the world level, United Nations legal instrument, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change says that climate change is a complex problem, which although environmental in nature, has consequences for many global outcomes, such as poverty, economic development, population growth, sustainable development, and resources management. In 1992, countries joined an international treaty in view to consider what could be done to reduce global warming and deal with any inevitable rise in temperature. With 197 parties, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change enjoys almost universal membership. The Kyoto Protocol. When they adopted the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, governments knew that their commitment will not be enough to seriously address climate change. So in 1995, in a decision known as the Berlin Mandate, the parties to the convention began a round of negotiation to agree on stronger and more detailed commitment for industrialized countries. After 2.5 years of intense negotiation, the Kyoto Protocol was adopted in Japan on December 11, 1997. The protocol in two periods, 2008 to 2012 and 2013 to 2020, with 192 parts, pose a limit to the major world economies on the total rejection of greenhouse gas emission. The Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was signed by 175 countries on April 22, 2016 at the United Nations headquarters, New York. They are today 187 to have signed it. With this agreement, the parties have undertaken to take measures to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. Ambitious, scalable, and universal, as this agreement may be or apply to all countries and all emissions, and is built to last. It is a monumental agreement which consolidates international cooperation in the fight against climate change and shows the way forward. Nobel Prize of Peace. In 2007, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and former US Vice President Albert Arnold Gore Jr., 1993 to 2001, jointly received the Nobel Peace Prize for their effort to collect and disseminate knowledge about human-induced climate change and to lay the foundation for the measures needed to combat these changes. The Climatic Action Summit 2019. September 23, 2019, there was a climate summit which was focused on key sectors where action can make the biggest difference. Here, heavy industry, nature-based solution, cities, energy resilience, and climate finance. Closing the 2019 Climate Action Summit, the Secretary General said, "You have breathed new life into strengthened cooperation and demonstrated renewed ambition. However, we will still have a long way to go. We need to develop more concrete projects and encourage more countries and companies to step up their efforts. It is essential that all financial institutions, whether public or private, make the definitive choice economy green." At the continental level, the natural hazards are a challenge, majorly for African networks, already insufficient and fragile. It often exacerbates by poor drainage system. The flood caused frequent disruption of transport and energy network, affecting telecommunications and other essential services. The disruption of infrastructure services is particularly severe in Africa in the case of extreme natural shocks. The first African Union Summit for Climate Resilient Infrastructure was held from April 27 to 29, 2015, during the second implementation period of the Kyoto Protocol. The top had to help plan the necessary measures to ensure that infrastructure can take on the challenge waiting for the continent. The four infrastructure sectors in which the summit focused on are energy, agriculture, food security, and water, ICT, and infrastructures of transport. The summit made it possible to present to representatives of African Union member states practical solutions to prepare at, confront the challenges of the effects of climate change on infrastructure in the areas of energy, ICT, infrastructure construction, water, agriculture, and food security, and also to attract international private investors and development agencies to invest in resilient infrastructure projects in Africa. The main themes discussed during these summits were challenges of preparing infrastructure for climate change, climate risk and their impact on energy infrastructure, climate resilience in infrastructure, risk of failing or inefficient infrastructure during climate change, potential opportunities. On the transport sector, the reference to sustainability, which is now essential in many areas of public action, inevitably extends to transport through the concept of sustainable transport. Appeared officially in 1991 within the framework of the CEMT, European Conference of Ministers of Transport. This concept retains a meaning close to that of the Brundtland Report. In particular, it takes up to three traditional pillars of sustainable development. Sustainable transport must, one, contribute to economic prosperity, contribute to social well-being, and this is achieved without harming the environment and human health. This is deduced from CEMT's report of 1991. The Canadian Center for Sustainable Transport, a leader in this reflection, defines more precisely the concept of sustainable transport in front of as in quote, to meet transport needs people and communities in safety and in a manner that respects the health of humans and ecosystem, as well as with equity among and between generations. It should be affordable and efficient, offer a choice of mode of transportation, and support a dynamic economy. Restrict emissions and waste in order to respect the planet's capacity to absorb them, and reduce at least the consumption of non-renewable resources. Reuse and recycle the components used, and minimize land use and noise generation. The transition to an integrated approach to sustainable transport presupposes the establishment of robust policies, institutional capacity building, mobilization of financial resources, and appropriate infrastructure to users. In developing transport policies for sustainable development, the challenge is to guide the sector towards an optimal compromise solution, which maximizes the economic and social benefit of transport while minimizing the environmental, social, and economic costs related to it. Goals of action. Sustainable transport is strongly linked to the existence of infrastructure that are resilient to climate change. Especially for roads, there are effective ways to adapt the new and modify existing ones to strengthen climate resilience. The question of choice then arises, should you prevent or must be healed? The objectives or the action objectives. Here, there are two main categories of interventions to answer these two questions relating to the issue of climate change, mitigation and adaptation. The combination of the two types of intervention is necessary. Mitigating climate change remains essential because adaptation effectively addresses the past effects of climate change. However, as the latter intensifies, the possibilities of successfully applying adaptation strategies diminishes, while that of their cost increases. Adaptation to climate change is a process that allows societies to adjust in response to changes in their environment. In order to limit the negative impacts of climate change or even benefit from the positive consequences, the adaptation strategies aim to increase the resilience and reduce the vulnerability of environments, organizations, communities, and individuals to the known of or anticipated effect of climate change. The implementation of such actions should be combined with measures to combat climate change, which aim in particular to reduce greenhouse gas emission. There are three types of adaptation. Here we have the anticipatory or proactive. It is put in place even before the impacts are felt. Autonomous or spontaneous, unconscious response to effective change. Planned, which is the result of political decision based on an observation of present or future change to which it is necessary to react in order to stick to or achieve a desired situation. By its global nature, climate change has multiple impacts and interconnected. It is therefore important to take this into account in the search for adaptation strategies, since this can respond to more than one consequences or conversely have an undesirable impact in another sector. Planners determine the most economical and appropriate adaptation strategy for each situation. The method consists of compare the cost of inactions with that of a preventive adaptation process, targeting three main elements. The cost of road assets over its entire lifespan. Here we look at construction, maintenance, repairs, and refurbishment state. This analysis is of crucial importance since roads that would but then allow savings on maintenance, repairs, and rehabilitation, which in the majority of cases largely offset the additional expenses related to the construction. Taking into account various scenarios, climate change, Most forecasts indicate that Africa climate will be very different from what it is today. However, there is no consequences on the nature, intensity, and geographic distribution of these changes. Taking into account a full range of climatic scenarios, of courses makes the analysis more complex, but not taking them into account could lead planners to miss the target and to overinvest or underinvest in climate resilience. The global impact of climate-induced traffic disruption. When a weather event leads to the closure of a road or reduces its capacity, the consequences on supply chains, economic production, and access to services vary widely, depending on local factors such as the volume of traffic, traffic on a given road, or the existence of alternative routes. Sure, busy roads, even relatively moderate climate change can have a serious impact on people and the economy, a situation that clearly justifies investing in adaptation. Sustainable transport is strongly linked to the existence of infrastructure that are resilient to climate change, especially for roads that are effective ways to adapt new, to build and modify existing ones to strengthen climate resilience. On the other hand, it must be emphasized that there are no universal solutions. In deciding whether and how to adapt roads to climate change, transport planners must assess their options on a case-by-case basis and avoid catch-all solutions. The following recommendations are very important. The good road maintenance is the most important and effective way to reduce the impact of climate change on the road network. The damage caused by climate shocks is more serious if there is no road maintenance system adequate. It is almost always advisable to invest preventively in improving pavements to combat rising temperatures. The marginal cost of this type of adaptation measures being relatively low. The relevance of adaptation strategies is more announced with regards to precipitation and flooding. The price to pay for building resilience to these stressors is usually higher, and subsequently the savings on maintenance and overhaul may not be sufficient to offset the initial cost. In this context, taking into account the overall impact of disturbances on the road network is essential to determine whether adaptation is economically justified. Paul put this same recommendation into practice and protect its transport infrastructure against the effect of climate. To this end, the World Bank has developed several initiatives to help countries integrate climate change into the management of their road assets. It is also working in collaboration with the African Union Commission and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, to establish a new instrument for investing in climate resilience in Africa. African Climate Resilient Investment Facility, AFRIRES. Thank you for your attention. And I want to accommodate questions, contributions, and observation in the course of my presentation.